Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another amazing session of our Tree of Knowledge series for 2020, which is in commemoration of celebrating and shedding light on the importance of National Arbor Month 2020. We've had some amazing guests join us, and I've been able to share some insight with you guys from different specialists to CEOs to professionals. And today I am so honored because I get to introduce to you all and share this moment with you guys as I chat to my role model, my inspiration, Catherine Constantidis, who is an entrepreneur, an international climate activist, a human rights defender, and the director of Miss Earth South Africa. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to talk to you today. So thank you for the time.
Catherine, we are going to jump straight into the conversation. As I've mentioned, we are celebrating, or we are approaching the celebration of National Arbor Month this year. So why is it so important now more than ever to commemorate such environmental days of importance globally?
I think these kinds of days they give us a really important opportunity to refocus attention on environmental days of importance, be it World Water Day, be it Arbor Month, be it National Environment Week, whatever those days are. It is so important that we celebrate them, that we really zone in on the importance of those days, and what we hope to achieve must always be to further education, awareness, and knowledge, because I don't think that we put enough emphasis on the space of climate change, the environment, water, waste. These are spaces that are not spoken about, and we need to be able to build conversations in order to connect all of these important dates throughout the year, but also to really educate and bring more people into our fold as such.
Yeah. And you've touched a bit on education. So in your opinion, is the environmental aspect covered enough by our educational systems and curriculums?
Absolutely not. I think it's a really important question, and I think that it is paramount that we understand that the environmental space is not covered enough within our curriculum. It is not something that children are exposed to. There are certain schools and certain schooling systems that really allow for a child to understand the environment in all aspects. But if you just look at the curriculum as it stands, the general national curriculum, unfortunately, we're not giving enough emphasis to the environment. We don't even zone in on all of these days of importance. There are so many. And as a country, we've always got to remember that we do have such great challenges. There is so much that one wants to, especially as a young democracy, so much we want to educate our children on. But we cannot neglect the environment, especially now, the kind of world we're living in. This is something that is crucially important.
Definitely. And you are an international, renowned climate activist. You've traveled the world. So I have to start at the very beginning. What drove you towards becoming a climate activist?
I think it was really an organic journey, because I don't remember being little and thinking that's exactly what I wanted to be. I always grew up and thought I'm going to be the president of South Africa.
Which I still think you are.
One day. But the journey towards that has been slightly different. I do think that a huge part and influence in the work that I do, the community programs that we've always been involved in, has to come from the kind of home we lived in as children. We lived in a home where, my father would spend hours with us in the garden. We had a very humble home and humble upbringing, but our garden was this place of fantasy and magic, and it really was such a special space in our lives. And so I think growing up and my father intentionally sharing with us that we were the custodians of this heritage, not just the garden, but the earth at large. Yeah. He almost gave us a sense of responsibility, and perhaps we took it too literally. And both Ella and myself are full-time working within this space to fight and safeguard and protect the environment around us. I would have to believe that it is an organic journey from the kind of values instilled in us as children.
Definitely. And Catherine, in your opinion, why is just again environmental education so crucial, and is enough resources and time being diverted towards that, especially in our communities and as society at large?
this issue of resources is really a huge one, and it's an important one. Working within the government and working within a department yourself, you will know that you fight for resources no matter what budget sits in front of you. We're always fighting for resources. The environmental space, and as a sector, I think is always one that is put at the bottom of the pile when it comes to putting an agenda together, putting a budget together, allocating resources. So it is very difficult to do everything that we would wish to see happen. But what we have to really create is a culture of being able to achieve whatever we set out to with the minimal resources we have available to us. I think through so many of the programs we do, both through Miss Earth South Africa and Generation Earth, this has been the fundamental golden thread, because to fight for resources is a constant. That never changes. That is the fight you're always fighting. To fight to find budget, sponsors, people to believe in what you're trying to achieve is such, I don't understand it. It's not a sport. And so you're always at the bottom of the pile. Yeah. And even when it comes to submitting proposals, you always feel you're not taken seriously, because the environment, doing environmental education, all of these things require the resources. But what people fundamentally don't understand is that we are intrinsically linked with the environment that we live in. We're intrinsically linked, even as a city. For example, I live in Johannesburg. Johannesburg is home, but we're linked to that ocean that's 7,000 kilometers away. We don't understand our connection to the rivers. We don't understand what it means to deplete our forests. And so I think that we really need to re-educate ourselves as a society. And coming out of this COVID pandemic, I really hope that people will reconnect with what is important and where do we put resources, because environmental education as an overarching umbrella is crucially important. And now more than ever, we need to really readjust our thinking to understand that we as a society also need to reprioritize what it is we're doing and how we use the world's resources without even flinching. This is something that we have to constantly push every single day.
Definitely. Wow. And then, Catherine, what does Arbor Week mean to you?
Arbor Week is like my birthday, because
it's
such a special time of the year. We get to plant trees. While we are recording this, you would definitely think it was like the middle of May or June, because it's freezing cold outside. It doesn't feel like spring, but I believe that in a few days' time, we're going to feel that spring.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, it really is such a special time of the year. It is a change, not only the change of season, but it's a fresh opportunity. Even though it's freezing cold, I looked out our window today and the trees are starting to blossom. Yeah. It's just that change in energy is really so special. And for me, it's just like an opportunity to start a fresh new chapter. Arbor Month is important because, you know, there's a beautiful saying that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the next best time is now. Yeah. I think it's actually a proverb. And that is so true, because, you know, I look back, last week we got to go to a school that we've been working with literally since we were at school. So for the last 15, 16 years, and I sat underneath these massive, massive acacia trees. And those trees we planted when there was not a single tree in that very community. And they're now these huge acacia trees. And I sit and I think, imagine if we could all just plant one tree during Arbor Month. Everybody. Imagine if we could plant a tree for every home. These are the things that can inspire hope. We've got to look at the tree and planting of trees during Arbor Month as something far greater than just the action. Yeah. But we need to really rethink about the seeds we plant in our everyday lives, the seeds of the kind of values we instill in each other as people, as a collective, in a workspace, in a community. And I think that Arbor Day is and Arbor Month is a beautiful reminder of all of those things. So Arbor Week for me is really like, it's that happy feeling. It feels like your birthday. It's like that eve before Christmas. I really think it's a wonderful time of the year, and it's an opportunity for us to reflect, to reassess where we're at, and really give full energy to the last leg of the year.
I definitely agree, Catherine, because I came walking in this morning in our building at work, and by the entrance last year, together with some of my managers, I actually planted an avocado tree. And because we've had such heavy rain for the past few days, I walked in this morning, and as I'm passing security, I'm like smiling and so excited. And they're like, Margot, what's wrong? I'm like, guys, did you see the tree is blossoming and it's growing and it's so green? So there's definitely that feeling of pride when you be able to go back and just see, and there's also a saying that says, you plant a tree for someone else, so shade of tomorrow. And that's so true. And that's always just something that, Arbor Month is something that reminds me so much of you all the time. It's just a matter of, and that's sort of where the name of Arbor Month birthed for me, is after meeting you. It's planting seeds of hope, because we're not only planting trees, we are literally planting into the lives of our communities and the current and future generations to come.
Absolutely.
Moving on to the next question, you've touched a bit on going back to Orange Farm recently. So would you share some of the campaigns? I know Miss Earth has been around for 20 years. I've had the privilege of coming through the program. So what are just share some light on the campaigns done by Miss Earth as well as Generation Earth?
Absolutely. So the most important thing is with both programs, but specifically with the Miss Earth South Africa, this is really a program that was aimed at empowering young women, getting more young women to understand their role within a community. And we use the platform of the environment to really drive that woman empowerment. And, in the first many years, actually, trying to get people to understand why we were focusing on planting trees or doing river cleanups or testing water and focusing on conservation. People didn't understand. They honestly didn't. I always say that I know in so many meetings that we sat in, especially in those first few informative years, people must have looked at Ella and myself and they must have thought that I fell out a tree and hit my head, because I had dreams of planting rows of thousands of trees. And climate change was not something that was even a term that was used. Then global warming was the phrase, but even then it was not something that affected us. It was something that was part of the Western world and very foreign to us as not only South Africans, but even as a continent. And so our journey was not only to educate the young women that we were involved with, but almost to create a culture of walking into a boardroom, knowing that they're going to say no, but at least we're educating and inspiring them to think differently. And I think that Al Gore really in 2007, with his first documentary, we could physically see a change. People were thinking differently. That green was the new black. It wasn't just a phrase. People were asking questions. People that were rude to us years before were calling us to have meetings to say, okay, well, where are you at? What are you doing? How do we now get involved? And even then, and even now, it has still always been, everyone wants to do something, but no one's prepared to put their money where their mouth is. Everyone almost wants a part of the pie, but is not prepared to put in the resources that are needed. And that still frustrates me immensely, because sometimes you work with people that make you feel cheated. And in the beginning, we did that, and then eventually we got to a point where we said, no, you either share the vision and understand what we're trying to achieve, or you don't. We can't do this so that you can tick boxes. You must do this with us to achieve the greater goal and the greater vision of where we're trying to move towards. And so to go back to your question about the kinds of projects, is to say that there's so many kinds of different projects that over the years we have been involved in. Food security programs, putting in food gardens and teaching communities to grow their own food, to start entrepreneurial opportunity from that very food garden. We went through a phase where we had to stop our food gardens completely because of the water crisis across South Africa. We then shifted slightly and started to focus specifically on the water crisis, trying to educate to understand what it means to be in this specific place of what is day zero? It became a new norm, but it was only a new norm for those that were affected. So we had to use this as an opportunity within the challenge to say, well, how do we take the lessons learned and try and really take those back into corporate South Africa, industry South Africa, and try to get people to, let's behave differently. Let's take the lessons learned here and say, well, what is my own water footprint as a corporate, as an industry? How do we change that? How do we become less reliant on these natural resources that really have had so much pressure put on them from all directions? And so our work has evolved and our programs have evolved over time. We used to do tree plantings and we continue to do them, but we started with tree plantings as probably 90 to 100% of all of the programs we did were around tree plantings. In the beginning, we were very involved in conservation as well, and specifically protection of conservation and educating children that lived around national parks and being able to take them into the national park where they'd never been. They never understood what happened in those parks, but their families were drawn into illegal wildlife trade because they were hungry and desperate for food. And so trying to connect the dots has been a very important part of the work that we do. So yes, we have the Miss Earth program that kind of runs on the surface, but underneath that is an extensive amount of work where we use that platform and brand to be able to sit around important tables where we can discuss policy, where we can discuss changing the way that people are doing things, where we can educate and create awareness in very different spaces. And so the Miss Earth has become a very powerful brand. Not only does it have the element of the program run each year, and we're privileged to meet young women such as yourself that become an integral part of who we are. And I think that is really special because we can look back on many, many years, and it's not just about, well, who won Miss Earth that year. It's more about who are the ambassadors that represent this brand. And yourself, as a wonderful example, are a beacon of hope. We look at you and say, we're inspired to do more, because if we could just plant a few seeds and you have blossomed to become this formidable leader in your own space. That for me is the journey of what our program is about, because you will go out and touch thousands of lives, and merely because we nurtured the seeds that were there, we nurtured what we saw in you as potential. And so when I say it really is a leadership program where we've used the vehicle of the environment to drive that, it really, really is. It's so much more about the human connection, being able to use the environment to connect those the human to human connection that sometimes we have lost. And so, you know, we focus on waste, we focus on water, we focus on climate change. The empowerment of youth through Generation Earth is really important, because young people must understand that they play an important role. Yeah. And I think that if anyone had to doubt that, they only need to look at 17-year-old Greta Thunberg, who really brought the world to a stop with her weekly Friday marches that we saw happen around the world over the last year. We've gone through a pandemic, and the environment and climate change once again has taken a back seat. But it's up to people such as yourself, organizations such as ours, to really continue fighting to keep the environment, not only during Arbor Month, but every day thereafter as a priority area. Because once this pandemic is over, the environment and the climate space are going to need us more than ever before.
I couldn't agree more with you, Catherine. And I mean, you've traveled the world. And as we all know, South Africa was one of the countries to sign the 2030 agreement to say that we are committed to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2030. So just through your eyes globally, where do you see us, and especially now having the pandemic forcing us to zoom into our preparedness for 2030? Just what does 2030 look like for you in terms of the environment and the implementation and achievement of these Sustainable Development Goals?
I think that the SDGs remain critically important to all of us, not just to the environmental space, but where we're moving to as a global village and a global community. I do think that this year of 2020, the pandemic that we've seen roll out has unfortunately put a halt on a lot of the environmental achievements we would have hoped to have gained during this year. And it almost brings 2030 so much closer, because we actually have so much work to do. And I fear that we will not achieve the goals that we have set out to by 2030. But what the pandemic has also done is that it has allowed us to truly, truly reflect. It's almost held a mirror up in front of us. And it's held a mirror up in front of us to say, who are we truly as nations? Individually, as countries, as continents, as a global community? What are the real challenges? We live such fast-paced lives, and the pandemic has allowed us to pause. And in that pause, we have had to face and deal with the scourge of violence against women, the scourge of poverty and inequality, hunger, those issues specific to our country. We've had to deal with basic necessities and human rights that people do not have access to: safe, clean drinking water, sanitation, a place to live in, a home. We've had to look at all of these things. And because of the pandemic, we have almost been awakened to it in a very different way, in a way that's almost scary. But what I can say is that we must always work towards something. Yeah. So the SDGs replaced the Millennium Development Goals, which were the MDGs prior to that. So the replacement was to say, well, now how do we reanalyze where the world's at? How do we reset our goals and our timeframes? We have so much work to do. And so I would say that the SDGs are an important marking, because it's something that we're still working towards. But I fear that we will never be able to achieve all of the goals that we have set out, only because the trajectory of so many different countries are set at different places. We are not in the same place that a country like Singapore or Denmark or Mexico is. We're all so differently placed on that kind of timeline, that we need to say, well, what are the goals for South Africa? And obviously, you know, from a ministerial perspective, the department will look and say, okay, well, these are the things we can achieve as a country, or these are the things that we're going to work towards. So we sign all of these agreements, all of these accords, but it really is about holding officials and leaders accountable, especially within the departments, especially in a political space and time frame where people move in and out. Yeah. And that is not only relevant to South Africa, but we need to keep a goal and ensure that they are not politically aligned, but they are aligned to what we want to achieve as a country. And no matter what happens politically, we must never shift away or reanalyze those goals. We need to continually move forward. And the officials within our departments play such a crucial role. And I think that sometimes that's underplayed, or you know, it's not respected as much as it should be. But it's the officials that work within departments that are the ones that are really driving us achieving those goals. And sometimes I think that they too need to be inspired and motivated to do more. And they've got to be seen as a critical part of the wheel moving forward. And so the SDGs remain critically important. We must move towards them. But I fear that there's not enough time for us to still achieve all that we need to.
Okay. And then, Kathleen, as an climate activist and human rights defender, you advocate very strongly for the call to action of humanity. Why is this such an important message for you?
I think that as in my journey as a leader and being able to work not only in my community, across the country, around the world, it is so important to look at what are the common threads of challenges that I see. And for me, it really goes back down to our humanity. It goes back to how we respect each other as neighbors, as brothers and sisters, as a large community, and as people, from one human being to the next. Somewhere along the line, we lost our moral fiber. We lost that beautiful silver lining of what it means to be a community, of what it means to be a connected society. And so I try to use my platforms and try to use the opportunities when I speak around the world to really remind people that we have to go back to citizenship. We have to go back to what does it truly mean to be a community. I'm reminded of these things in small ways every day. You know, it's not even in the big actions. It's not in the national agreements or international accords that we sign. It's what happens between me and my neighbor every single day. Yeah. It's how I act as a citizen of my community. You know, so often for example, if I use waste as an example, so often we complain that our communities are dirty, our cities are not clean. But I would ask and challenge people, what is happening on your front lawn? Yeah. What happens on the pavement where you live, the street that you live in? When you see a paper, do you pick it up or do you drive past? Or when you're walking in your road and you see whatever has been thrown there, do you leave it and just walk by, or do you go and pick it up? And you're picking it up not to punish the person that threw it there. You're picking it up so that your community is better. Yeah. Imagine everybody just looks after their own street. If we all were committed to, instead of pointing fingers, putting a little bit of work in and saying, what can I do to contribute to the whole? Yeah. And I use the example because it's an easy one. We can all recognize it and we can all affiliate ourselves into that picture. But more so, what kind of communities do we want to have? What kind of South Africans do we want to be? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. And it goes back to our humanity. It goes back to understanding that every single one of us plays our part in building our country, building our continent, and building the kind of future globally that we want to be a part of. And if we can't do that, we've got greater problems than even the environment, climate change, poverty, the alleviation of hunger. We have greater problems. We have to go back to basics. We have to understand firstly and foremost that each and every one of us is a human being, and we all have needs and wants. We all have challenges. We all live with an immense amount that sits on our shoulders every day. What do we do to truly ask, how are you, to the person that we walk past every morning? Instead of just waiting, running through when they say yes, no, all fine, do we actually engage? We have started to live a life that the normal is not to engage. And so we built barriers between us, even in a workspace. And so my challenge is that as we deal with the big issues, we must also go back and deal with the basics. We need to redefine who it is that we are as a people. And it is our humanity that matters first and foremost above everything else.
Definitely. And Kathleen, just the last question to just end of this beautiful, informative session. You've done so much through your activism. So just what keeps Kathleen going?
Oh, there's so many things. Yeah. I'm blessed and I'm grateful to have walked the journey that I've walked. It has not been easy. It has been one that has been challenging above and beyond. However, I always know that there is hope. I always remember that there's a reason that we do what we do, because I have a little boy who reminds me that, you know, the small things matter. I have the ability to understand that I'm very, very religious, and I pray a lot, and especially when I go into dangerous places and spaces, and when I travel around the world into places that are unsafe, I know that my faith keeps me going. I know that I'm able to continue to push through, and that is a deep sense of belief. It is a deep sense of my own belief, and the belief that no matter what happens, we will always find ourselves where we need to be. It may not be where we want it to be, but it's always going to be where we're meant to be. And we have to keep going. It is young women like you that remind me what we have done over these years matters. It's young women who, like you, have got an entire month planned, are doing exciting things that excites me. It reminds me that what we do matters. It's the small things. When I receive a letter from a child in Cambodia that I worked with more than 10 years ago, and she tells me that she finished school because we did something for her, in a moment, you are able to change a person's life. And the ability to do that is not only something that I draw strength from, but that's something that reminds me of the huge responsibility that we have as human beings, responsible to each other. It's the children that I look at when I work in communities in Orange Farm, in Western Sahara, in Khayelitsha, when I've been with you, in wherever it might be across the country. And it's that sense of hope that you can see in someone's eyes just because you have spent an hour there with them. If we could have the ability to do that for another human being, imagine if we were more deliberate in our everyday actions. And if we can just use our platforms to share that hope in and amongst the negativity that we see, especially on social media, imagine what kind of world that we could live in.
Definitely. And what an amazing way to end of this session with us. Catherine, thank you so much for making the time to just share your views and insights with us. For those of you that wants to follow some of the amazing and incredible work that Catherine does all around the world, you can follow her at Change Agent SA on Instagram, and also the Miss Earth South Africa _SA page. And then you can also follow her on Facebook at Catherine Constantidis. Catherine, once again, thank you so much for this. And it was really amazing sharing this with you.
Thank you so much for the privilege and opportunity. I truly appreciate it. And I wish you all the best for Arbor Month. I look forward to joining you for a small portion of it. Just know that the work that you do is something we're immensely proud of. And as a young leader, you deserve the many accolades and awards that are coming your way. You continue to inspire us. And you are the role models that we need in our country, especially for our young people. So thank you for all that you do.
Like I always say, I am because of you. So with all of that, you get a thank you.